want to briefly summarize last week's assignments. We talked about, I'm going to keep this real short and sweet because I don't want to be redundant. We talked about the 4 R's: remove, repair, reframe, relax. And then part of the journaling was, how have I let myself get sucked into power struggles? And I'm not saying that you should never fight any battles. I don't want you to misinterpret this assignment. Like you're never supposed to, you're never supposed to care about the relationship so much that you want to struggle to save it from sinking. You've done that. And in some cases, you probably had to do it because he wasn't captain of the ship being the marriage. You've been the captain of that ship. He might have been the captain in other areas, maybe paying the bills, maybe he works and you don't, or maybe he makes more money than you do and he pays more of the bills. I don't know your situation. The other thing is, what did I say or do while in the power struggle? How often have I accepted these invitations to participate in power struggles? What are some of my negative downloads? In other words, I'm going to make up a simple example. He doesn't hang in very long for the conversation when you have an important message, and maybe your message went 30 minutes and he got lost at about the 10-minute mark. And so you just assume that he wasn't interested in what you were talking about, and so your negative download might be, he just doesn't care about my feelings or my thoughts or my opinions. But what are some positive reframes you could use instead? In this case, I'm going to shut this mic off here. In this case, what might have been going on would have been an executive function deficit, where it was too much data in one sitting and he couldn't retain it all. So the goal of that thing was to become a functional responder rather than a dysfunctional reactor. What is a functional responder? It's somebody who responds late. In other words, I'm going to think about how I'm going to approach this topic before one word comes out of my mouth. And it's functional in the sense that I'm not going to be throwing gas on the fire. I'm going to keep this thing from escalating. And if I get my timing and wordage right and voice tone right, I'm actually going to solve the problem rather than just avoiding making it worse. As opposed to a dysfunctional reactor, which is I threw gas on the fire and I didn't think about what I was going to say or do. I just immediately jumped in and let him have it. Then, let's see. We also talked about sensitive message delivery. And this may have seemed like it was for his benefit. I won't lie, he's going to get some secondary benefit from it. But this wasn't so much for his benefit as it was to save you from getting into situations where there's something that you really need, there's a message that you really need to mention. You can't just shove all of your needs and wants and messages under the carpet. But it was hopefully a way to deliver the message that didn't raise his anxiety, which in turn reduced the likelihood that he was going to melt down or shut down or just engage in false agreement, which is, yeah, sure, yeah, you're right, yeah, I'll do whatever you say, when he doesn't mean it. With the end goal of being it doesn't turn into another fight, an argument, in which case now you're back to the re-injury process again. If you stump your toe on the dresser when you get up in the morning, it'll be fine 3 or 4 days later. But if you wake up and you stump your toe, and then tomorrow you stump it again, and then the day after that you stump it, you never get better. And I would go on record as saying it's slightly worse than you don't get better. You slowly get worse because there's this cumulative effect that goes on with elongated, continued chronic low-grade injury. So as you have lived it, your constructive criticism, sometimes even your neutral comments, and this is an ASD trait again, have downloaded in his brain as an attack. And so not only does your message get lost, if you try to continue to push in that moment, It just started another fight. Now there's more resentment, more lack of trust. So the goal here was to deliver a message to reduce the likelihood that he's going to download it wrong or put a negative spin on it, which he's an expert at that. He's an expert at taking what you say and spinning it. So we don't want you to get 4 steps forward and then go 4 steps back, and now you got to start all over again. So you may get less pushback if you word things along the lines of the script that we talked about. It's likely that he won't be as defensive. It's less likely that he'll do some version of meltdown or shutdown or false agreement. And so we use that script, and I'm not going to repeat it. You already know what it is. And that thing was designed, of course, it's important what you say, but it's even more important what you don't say. And it's also important when you say it. Timing is hugely important. And it's also important to monitor your voice inflection as much as possible, and voice volume, and facial expression. I know that seems like a lot of work, and body language. And we could even go the extra inch and say another trait of ASD is it's difficult for them to make eye contact, especially when they're talking to their significant other, when there has been a huge degree of tension in that relationship. So it would also be advisable. So I'm not saying don't look at him at all, and I'm not saying you stare him in the eyeballs when you're talking, but it would be good to think in terms of minimizing eye contact when you're trying to deliver a message that where you know you're kind of at risk of him spinning it negatively and then reacting accordingly. So, and again, you don't want to use that script in the heat of the moment. When the offense, so to speak, occurs, you're going to make a mental note of it. I'm not going to address this now because I'm already triggered by what just happened. I'm going to go back to the blackboard, look at my script, and come up with a pre-planned response that I'm going to rehearse and memorize. It's not going to be that hard. It's only 5 lines long. Then I want to move on to today's agenda then. And this is going to be, I don't know what I want to call it. We'll just call this having a vision for a better future. So you have no doubt lost hope. So many times you wouldn't be here if you had lost hope. Your expectations largely did not get met. Your attempts at saving the relationship, you did the best that you knew how to do, and I'm not faulting you one bit. Your heart was in the right place. But your effort to get him back into the relationship and to be emotionally reciprocal largely went nowhere. And there might have been times where it looked like he's changed. 2 weeks or so. By God, I think we've turned a corner. Just to realize on week 3, no, right back to square one again. And so you have had the thought, justifiably so, I'm not about to get my hopes up again because my heart can't stand another letdown. I'm just not going to do it. And so you almost as self-preservation, again, totally understandable, you've hit a state of hopelessness just to keep, that was your version of trying not to get re-injured. Not a bad plan. But it might be a tool that worked to a degree for a while that might have outlived its usefulness. And it might even be at the root of your current misery, this hopelessness business. Hopelessness is kind of like, I don't really have a vision for how things could be any better. I'm sure you've had that thought. Things have been this way for so long that this is no longer just a pattern. This is a theme with him. And the hopelessness creates kind of a real bleak outlook on life in general that bleeds over into other areas of your life. It doesn't just happen at home with him. If you get in this hopelessness state, it kind of bleeds out into other areas. And it's kind of a mindset of why do anything, So the moral to this little sermon here is you can't find hope in just one person. In this case, him. That's putting all your eggs in one basket. That's very dangerous. It's giving him too much power. You know, he has to say certain things in order for me to be happy. He has to do certain things in order for my self-esteem to be intact. He has to live up to my expectations, or it results in my depression. Or he has to avoid saying or doing certain things, or it damages me in some shape, form, or fashion. And you have, and I'm not faulting you, because you thought you married a golden retriever, but you married a lone wolf, someone who is very independent, autonomous, low in social and emotional skills, low in social and emotional needs. So for you to make your happiness, joy, peace of mind, whatever, contingent upon what he says or does, that's like taking a pile of $100 bills, your hard-earned money, and putting it out there on the street, praying to God the wind doesn't blow it away. You can't put yourself at that kind of risk anymore. You can't count on him, can you? I'm not saying he's failed you 100% of the time. You can't bet on him to follow through. You wouldn't be here if he always followed through. And I'm not trying to trash him. He's probably a good guy. I would probably like him fine. He's probably smarter than me. And it's not just him. You honestly can't count on anybody, any one person. Now, there's some people that you feel like, they're pretty safe. They pretty much come through for me all the time. They're always there for moral support. So, but even those people might get sick and die. I'm not saying, just when I say you can't count on anybody, I'm not saying that they're always going to let you down purposefully, but I know I've adopted the philosophy a long time ago. I can't count on anybody because they might move, they might die, they might get sick. There's so many different things that can go wrong. You don't want to, at this point forward, don't put your eggs in one basket ever again, unless you're a believer, which I am. Certainly can count on God. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to get sick. He's not going to move to Tahiti. He'll be around. So we want to find hope somewhere. And by the way, that's your job. Your hunting down hope is your responsibility. Happiness, finding happiness, your job. You need to realize that you have a lot of control. In spite of all the mess in this marriage, you have more control than you're actually giving yourself credit for. And you have the power to create a new future. Some of you may not believe that, but just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it's not the case. So we would want to call hope, maybe just call it positive anticipation, as opposed to negative anticipation. Positive anticipation is having some sort of vision for a better future. You know, we all have some idea of how things could be better tomorrow. So it's not like you've never had that thought before. And if you don't start thinking in terms, and this is where you need to make the paradigm shift in your brain, I'm going to make a conscious effort on a daily basis to engage in the business of positive anticipation. Otherwise, there's no reason to get out of bed. If you got nothing to look forward to, that's just a sad state of existence, and I don't want you there, and hopefully you're not there. So anticipation is an emotion involving pleasure or anxiety. And you've lived and breathed negative anticipation for too long. In other words, what's the next thing he's going to do that's going to let me down? What's the next thing he's going to say that's going to hurt me? That's negative anticipation. I'm not faulting you for having that. If you have a long history of being let down, why wouldn't you think here's a new day, I'm going to be let down again? I understand that. But you can't live in that space anymore. Because sometimes we talked about you can't afford to do any more re-injuring. Sometimes that negative self-talk in your head about anticipating the worst is re-injury. And wherever there is negative anticipation, ladies, a self-fulfilling prophecy is not far behind. If you expect something to turn out badly, you're right. You will be right. We have to stop that destructive cycle and replace it with positive anticipation. You need to have something to look forward to, kind of a little psychological carrot at the end of the stick. And you need something to positively anticipate in as many domains of life as you can. Spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, financially, vocationally, and any other areas of your life that you can think of. You're on the hunt. Your radar, your antennae are way out here. I'm on the hunt for positive things to anticipate. And what you think about expands, you know that. So if you start thinking, oh, I would like to do this, I would like to do that, I hope that this happens, I'm going to be thinking about this, that, and the other, then you're setting up a self-fulfilling prophecy in reverse. How many times have you replayed the movie in your head where he did you wrong? 100? 500? You got to stop playing that movie and replace it with the new movie, which we will just entitle it, My Vision for a Better Future. And you want to start small, not trying to rebuild Rome overnight. Just pick one little thing. It doesn't matter how little or insignificant according to somebody else's opinion. You want to pick something that's worth getting out of bed for in the morning and then build from there. I do want to now dive into the business of dealing with resentment. I'm not faulting you for being resentful. Who the hell wouldn't be? But if we wanted to talk about the number one re-injury item, it would be resentment. It's going to make it impossible to stay objective as you try to heal your emotional wounds. You won't be able to fully recover if you're going around with resentment. So the antidote to resentment is forgiveness. And some of you are thinking, oh boy, I don't know if you want to open up that can of worms, but maybe you don't understand what forgiveness is. It's not for him. It's for you. Think of forgiveness. Think of resentment, ladies. I wish I had a prop here. I'll just make one up. Let's say I had a cup, and it's a cup of bitterness or poison. And every time I reflect on how much I've been injured, I take a sip of this poison. And every time I allow him to push my buttons, I take a sip. And every time I'm reminded of what he said or done, or what he didn't follow through with, or I react toxically to his behavior, I'm sipping on. That doesn't hurt him. Your resentment is slowly killing you. It doesn't do a damn thing to him. It weakens your immune system. It puts you in chronic low-grade anxiety where you have this slight drip of cortisol and adrenaline because your amygdala is always a little bit on alert, and it slowly chips away at your health. So you want to let go of resentment for your benefit, not because he deserves it, but because you deserve to let go of the past. It's literally a gift that you give you and allows you to get unstuck and get on with life. And it also takes time. If you're not able to forgive yet, no problem. Maybe the pain is just too fresh. You don't have to hurry, but you need to start the process pronto. And it is a process. It's not going to happen 100% overnight. Even if you totally bought into my little speech here, and by God, he's right, I'm going to just dive in and forgive him 100% now. No, that's not going to happen like that. But you can certainly begin the process. It's a choice. Forgiveness is a choice. It's not something that you think you should do because some online therapist tells you that's what you're supposed to do. No, it's a choice. It's going to allow you to heal old wounds so that you can get on with the really important stuff in life. Now, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. You want to remember what happened so you can protect your sanity in the future. And in the event that you were to get divorced, you don't want to hook up with somebody else like that. So you want to remember. By the way, when you forgive him, you're not letting him off the hook. He's very much on the hook. And you don't even have to tell him that you've forgiven him. And you don't have to trust him again either. Trust is earned, and he's going to have to earn your trust back before you can trust him again. So forgiveness is not saying, well, what you did and said to me that hurt me so much is okay. No, it's not okay. And there's this little thing, whether you believe in it or not, called karma. And he'll have to answer to karma, and you may not be around to notice when karma's calling. In other words, you may not know what he's going through in the way of dealing with his behavior and traits. Having traits of disorder does not exonerate you from organic consequences. So you want to forgive him not because he deserves it, because you deserve it. You deserve to be set free. And you may need to forgive yourself first. I meet a lot of ladies that, if they want to be honest, you ladies may not be at that point now because you're a little smarter than this. But some of the ladies in the early going of an ASD relationship, they start blaming themselves. What? Am I too fat for him now? Am I getting ugly, old? Have I lost my personality, my charm? Am I no longer funny? Am I no longer sexy? Am I no longer any good in the bedroom? And you start wondering if it's you. And you may have blamed you. Well, if I'd have just been nicer, if I'd have just done this research a long time ago and found out what was really going on, it was an autism spectrum disorder, then maybe, I could, all of that is just a mess in your head. So instead of ruminating about what you could have done differently, what you should have done differently, no, you're going to forgive yourself too. I did the best that I knew how to do, given the information that I had at the time. So you may need to forgive yourself first before you can forgive him. Any questions on this resentment business?
This is Tracy. I don't have any questions, but I know the truth of what you say. And there's been, I think probably there's a fair amount of us that have also had some sort of childhood abuse, sexual abuse, things like that. And that was the first, going through trying to get help with that at another point in life, 20 something years ago, was, this idea of forgiveness that was new to me at that time. And it's hard, I remember it was hard for me to do that, but at the end of that, knowing the truth of the freedom that I experienced versus, I'm not articulating very well, and I apologize, but I just know that what you're saying is very true. For me, because I've kind of had to do this in different situations over the last 20 or 30 years, I'm most helped by a book or a guide, and somebody put a book called Bitterness or About Bitterness in one of the Facebook pages, which I found very good. I was going through that. And then there's another book by a fellow by the name of Andy Stanley called Enemies of the Heart. And he takes, he kind of guides one through it. So if those are tools that somebody can use, or if other people have different tools or books, it would be maybe helpful to share those on the Facebook page.
Yeah. If we wanted to grossly oversimplify this business so you can fully grasp the notion that it's truly for you, here's the major bullet points. Resentment is only hurting you. One could make the argument, well, if my resentment also resulted in some revenge that also hurt him, somebody could make the argument, it might be good to have some resentment if you wanted to punish him and get some revenge. We're only human. Sometimes you think like that. But your resentment only hurts you. And it hurts you in a very insidious way that chips away at your sanity and your physical health and you can't even notice it. It's not stark, a real abrupt turn for the worse. It's like a frog getting slowly boiled in hot water. It starts out with room temperature water before you know that he's cooked. And he didn't see it coming. And so I like to put it like this. Forgiveness is the antidote, and forgiveness is simply this cup of bitterness that I sip on every time I think about how I've been victimized. I'm going to put it down, and I'm not going to reflect on the injuries anymore, because every time I reflect on the injury, I re-injure. Your memories have a content memory, which is, let's take a particular issue that was really problematic for you, that really hurt. When you think about that, there's the content memory, which was what was said or done, but there's the emotional memory, which is, this is how I felt when that thing happened. So when you think about the past hurts, you relive the past hurts. You can't afford to do that. These are basically just the major points, ladies, of all four sessions. In session one, these are the bullet points that I don't want you to forget. We talked about his mind blindness, alexithymia, executive function deficits, and anxiety, and how that caused communication breakdown. We talked about and looked at some specific items to prove that his social IQ and emotional IQ was low. Way below yours. You're playing Major League, he's playing T-ball. We looked at the neurotypical stages of growth in the marriage. We also looked at the neurodiverse stages of growth, or lack thereof. You did a self-test for overinvestment. You categorized and prioritized the things that were burdensome to you. And hopefully in your journal, you did a summary of the exact behavior and words you desire from him. In session two, we looked at healthy emotional detachment, letting go, and resiliency consciousness. Last week, we looked at the 4 R's, positive reframes, sensitive message delivery, and setting healthy boundaries on you. And then today, we've looked at the vision for a better future and dealing with resentment. Does anybody have anything that they feel like they could share in the way of the journaling stuff that you did? Maybe it was some insights, some epiphanies, some revelations, something that you hadn't thought of before that put you on a different track. Is there anything in your journal that you would like to share with the group that you think might be important for them to hear?
I was journaling about the progress in my divorce, how at each step there's kind of this punishing phase where I feel like he gets very vicious, and then your waiting period and just saying to myself, okay, this is an executive function deficit. And then in that bitterness book, How Not to Be Bitter, it talks about if the cup is full of sweetness, the sweetness will overflow. If the cup is full of poison, the poison will overflow. So really looking at trying to make my insides sweet. And that, I think, helps me with the people involved, like my attorney. You have to remain composed and reasonable and work in this legal framework, which is very, very foreign to me. But I have to pour that sweetness into myself.
Yeah. And that is kind of a head game that you play with yourself. And basically, if you want to look at all the stuff we've talked about in these 4 sessions, it's all, I don't particularly like the term head game, but it is, I got to go back and rewire my brain. You know, the brain is very plastic. There's this thing called neuroplasticity. And your brain doesn't arrive at a certain level and then it never changes. It changes every time you learn something new. Literally, physically changes. There's different neurons. You've heard the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. So when I say you're literally rewiring your brain, it's exactly what's going on in the physical sense, not only the psychological sense. There's new activity and new connections going on in your brain that will in turn change your reality, because you will now have a slightly different belief system on some levels. You'll have some slightly different thinking patterns. It will result in new and improved emotions, which will result in new and improved behavior, which will result in new and improved responses from others. And it's just a cascade of things where now you are in control of your circumstances. Fortunately, you're not suffering alone anymore, but you did for a long time. And it's not uncommon, and I don't know if this happened to you or not, any of the ladies in here, but it's not uncommon at all for, in those cases where she and her husband know some other people, for these other people to think, I'll use Margot as the example, not that this happened to her, but some people, Margot's husband's name is Jeff, right, Margot?
Yes.
And so I don't know that this happened with you and Jeff, but some people might, back in the day, might have thought, God, Margot's always complaining about Jeff. I know Jeff. He's not a bad guy. He seemed like a nice guy. He works and he pays the bills. And I don't even know what the hell she's talking about. She seems kind of whiny. But they never get to see what goes on behind closed doors. If they could put a camera up in the corner of the room and watch what was going on, they go, oh my God, Jesus Christ. How can she stay with that guy? So my point being is you're in the vast minority of, you're in the vast minority. There's not a whole lot of NT wives. There's a bunch and more coming along, but there's not a billion NT wives in relationships with autistic husbands. And he is so disconnected that now it's causing psychological and physical problems for her. You're in the vast minority of cases there. And so you're going to have, until now, few, if any, people are going to understand your situation. That's a place of hell to be living in right there. And so that's why I say it's going to be important for you to continue on so that you don't suffer in isolation any longer.